Welcome to Moving People Forward with Mark Elfstrand. This program is a series of conversations on commonly seen challenges in everyday people's lives. We hope you'll be inspired by the stories you hear today. Perhaps you know of someone who would also benefit. Be sure to share the program link with a friend. Now, here's Mark.
In the business world, the concept of integrity sounds mighty noble and worth pursuing. But the challenge is to live it out, and that's much more difficult, as people quickly learn. My guest today is national speaker, author, and thought leader on integrity. He has spoken around the world and coached numerous C-suite executives on the idea of building value through core values. With me on Moving People Forward is John Blumberg, and for a number of years, John was an executive with the firm Arthur Andersen, but where he went next is really going to be the important part of our story today. John, welcome. Glad to see you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Great to be here with you.
I want to get started with that Arthur Andersen piece because that was a really important part of your life. Take us back in your history and what were you doing for the firm?
Yeah, so it was really the whole foundation of where I started coming right out of college. I actually got my CPA, was in audit for about 5 years, and then I always say shifted my focus from numbers to people.
Okay.
And I started moving into the human resource and recruiting part of the firm and actually moved quite a bit around, eventually coming to Chicago to go into a firm-wide role to help lead our recruiting efforts around the world. And it was perfect. I loved the firm. I loved our team. The hardest part in leaving to go into speaking was actually leaving the firm. And it gave me an opportunity to build so many skills. And it was such a great culture, ironically, in a firm that imploded. A lot of people think the culture was corrupt. And I would say, quite the opposite. It was a very rich culture, which is a lesson in itself that it only takes a few. And certainly the Arthur Andersen story and the implosion of it's a complicated story, but I would say it was just an amazing group of people all over the world that I had an opportunity to work with and to grow with and really evolve over that 18-year period that I was with the firm.
Okay, 18 years, and you're at a well-established company, and let's just, say it, you're probably making a pretty good living at this. And then all of a sudden you make this jump, a leap out of the firm into your own business. Just tell us about that part of the journey.
Yeah, I actually, what was strange about it is that a lot of people said, John, I wish I had the courage to do that. And so many people started saying that, I started freaking out like, oh my gosh, is this like jumping off a cliff or
right,
something
yes.
like that? But I really, particularly when I went into a firm-wide role, I had an opportunity to speak a lot just because of the position itself all over the world. And in doing that, I thought I really like this speaking thing, and I got to talk on a lot of leadership principles. And there was a guy at one of our student leadership conferences that he came up at the end. He was the last person in line. As a speaker now, I always pay attention to the last person in line because they really do want to talk with you. And a lot of people would come up and say, John, I love your stories. I love how you, your presentation. But Sam, and I wish I knew his last name because I would run him down all over this world if I could find him. But Sam walked up and said, John, what you shared tonight, and I had this little presentation on getting a vision for your life.
Yeah.
And he said, what you shared tonight, I think will change the course of my life. And I thought, wow, now that's worth trading my career for, to be able to go and help people do that. The reason I would love to hunt Sam down is because I'd love to tell him coming up that night a year later changed the course of my life. And I felt it was a calling. I prayed about it a lot. It was a struggle in the sense that it was a great firm, a great position, and a great situation. So, but over time, I felt God saying, if you want to stay at the firm, we'll do great work there. Or if you want to go on this adventure, let's do it. And so I signed up with a lot of trust to see where this adventure would go.
Okay, so you've been a corporate trainer for a number of years, but also as part of that journey, you've written 4 books, right?
Yep.
So just kind of give us a quick summary of those.
Yeah, so the first one actually started, Mark, when I was, so when the firm imploded in 2002, I'd been speaking for 5 years,
Right.
and so I was well into this, although the firm was my biggest client. And when it imploded, it was so heartbreaking. And I thought, this is not about Arthur Andersen. I don't even think it was about Enron. This is about all of us. And so I actually went to write a book called Our Dream at Risk. It was going to be a very hard-hitting business book.
Yeah.
But I sat down to write the first chapter, and it was about a guy who metaphorically got going to work on a Sunday morning, running late, ironically, and he gets hit by a train, and it's about his story of what he learns about life. And actually, it was about the train wrecks in life. But as I wrote that, I felt God saying, "No, this is a novel. It's a parable."
Oh.
And I thought, well, I don't know how to write a parable, and I felt God saying, "Well, I do." So anyway, it ended up.
He used those himself, didn't he?
What's
This
that?
guy Jesus Kennedy, didn't he use
He
those
kind of
parables?
used parables quite a bit, right? So I thought he might know something about this, right? Exactly. So I ended up writing it as a story,
Right.
and it turned out to be I changed the title because Our Dream at Risk didn't sound like a novel,
Okay.
as one of my readers fed back to me in the manuscript, and so I actually ended up writing this book called Silent Alarm.
Yeah.
One of the lessons that he learned along the way was the values build value, and so there was a publisher that read that and said, "We want to write a book on building value with values," and that ended up being a book 4 years later called Good to the Core.
Yeah.
And that really was the turning point for me. It was by a publisher called Simple Truths, and they write their branding is very short books, almost 8,000 word count, which is like a really long magazine article.
Sure.
I talked them into 10,000 words, but what I realized when the book came out, and it threw me in a lot of conversations about values, was that I had only scratched the surface, and that's what led me to the other two most recent books called Return on Integrity.
Yeah, and let's just talk about those. You've actually got the original book had that title, but for a specific audience, Return on Integrity. So who was the audience for
Yeah,
this?
so I felt, and I felt really, really strongly about this, Mark, is that I wrote it for the CEO or the executive director or the president or the
Right.
chairman of the board. It's the leader at the top, whatever the nature of that organization is. And so it's very specifically written to that person, because I felt if the leader at the top doesn't embrace this idea of integrity and building value with values, that it's really problematic. And so that was the journey that I began. It was going to be a 1-year project that ended up being a 4-year journey. And that was a lesson within itself. And I'd like to think it wasn't procrastination. It was that the more I looked at it, the more I saw. And I thought, I don't want to put this out until I think I've got a body of work that is worthy of that level really engaging in. What happened was, and as CEOs would look at that, they said, well, what do I give my people?
Yeah.
And because this book was written for them. And so a year ago, I came out with the individual version. And so the individual, they have the same title, which is a little confusing in the marketplace, but we really felt the Return on Integrity was really what this was all about. And so the subtitles are different. And the subtitle of the individual version is The Individual's Journey to the One Essential Thing.
Right.
And that's written for anybody. They can be in an organization where the CEO is actually doing the Return on Integrity themselves, or they can just go to Amazon and buy it, and it's their own individual journey. And so it's very much written for the individual, and what a joy to have a book that was for everybody again.
Yeah, well, it's kind of nice because you've already got a lot of the material ready for the second book from the first
Well,
one.
you would think that, and I thought, well, this is just a little bit of an extract,
Yeah,
right? And
right.
it was actually harder to write than I thought it would
Yeah.
be, because I really thought I've got to reframe this in the mindset of the individual. So it actually proved to be more challenging than I thought it did. Sometimes it's better to start with a blank sheet of paper, I think.
Yeah, I
So.
suppose so. Yeah, very good. Well, we're going to take a quick break here and then continue our discussion with John Blumberg, national speaker, author, thought leader on integrity. And John seeks to impact our culture by helping people live by core values. Coming up, more on that nitty-gritty part of life called integrity.
God is our safe place and our strength. He is always our help when we are in trouble. This word of God in Psalm 46:1 says it all. God is our safe place. He is our strength. He is our help when we are in trouble. Whenever and wherever we are invited, nationally or internationally, Lutheran Church Charity's mission is to bring the mercy, compassion, presence, and proclamation of Jesus Christ to those who are suffering and in need. LCC is a ministry of presence, to be present with Jesus, to lift up people in times of joy and sorrow, in prayer, and by passing through donations of dollar per dollar to those in need. Through our canine ministries, we respond and deploy with boots on the ground and paws within 24 hours, often sooner, of any crisis or disaster situation we're invited into. You see, for us, the bottom line is making a difference by being present for people who are suffering and in need with that mercy, compassion, presence of Jesus Christ. Thank you again for allowing us the privilege to stand alongside and serve others. Jesus and your partnership make that possible to touch thousands of lives.
This is Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand. We're about to continue our discussion here with John Blumberg. John is a specialist in leadership coaching on the topics of core values and integrity. Well, you define that word integrity perhaps a little differently than some people might expect. Talk about that.
Yeah, so when I wrote Return on Integrity, one of the stances that I took was that integrity is not a core value, which is a little odd because almost any organization that lists their core values puts integrity in the mix,
Sure.
and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But what I say is integrity is the fabric of every value. I think a lot of times we think about integrity as honesty or what you do when no one is looking.
Yes.
And I think that is a lagging indicator, Mark. It's not the definition of integrity, it's a result of it. That when integrity is in play, then you are honest and you'll do the right thing. But it's much more than that. So I like to think of integrity as, there are three words, I guess, that really play to that. And one is called whole, entire, and undiminished. If you really think about it, it's integrated, it's connected.
Right.
And so when we think about integrity, if you think about the integrity of a bridge, for instance, it only has integrity because of the integrity of every single part of that bridge. And so every piece of that matters, and it's the connection of all of that that really makes integrity work. So I think that we have sold integrity short. Yes, it's honesty. Yes, it's doing what is right. But those are not, those are the lagging indicators, not what fuels integrity. And so I tried to really broaden and deepen the conversation on really what integrity is.
Okay, you've used three Ds within the context of your book, Return on Integrity: dilemma, definition, and destiny. Did I get those right?
Well, certainly for the first book. I changed the middle word in the second book, and I can explain that.
I didn't get to that one yet.
Yeah, I didn't. I probably should explain that because I thought after the first one went out, that's the problem with the book. Once it's out, you don't get it back.
Right.
And so there is a bit of a story around that. But yeah, it was the 3 Ds that you described when I wrote the book, the version for the leader at the top.
Right. Okay, so what are those? I mean, just expand that out a little bit for us.
Yeah, so first of all, I really came up with a 3D idea because I felt this is like going to a 3D movie, right?
Okay.
If you go to a 3D movie, you're in the middle of the movie, right? It's coming at you. And one of the things I felt for the leader at the top is you can't lead this from a distance. You have to have your own experience with it, your own wrestling match with this idea of defining your own values and then the values of the organization. So you three-dimensionally have to be in this scenario. And then the 3D certainly to frame out in a memorable way the sections of the book. And so it was dilemma, definition, and then destiny. I did change the middle because what I found when the book came out, and this probably should have been predictable, is what leaders wanted is to play with the idea of the definition of core values.
Yeah.
And what I meant it as is defining your own core values. And it's a lot more fun to play around with the cognitive, intellectual brain candy of, well, what is a core value? And what I found was it was a bit of a distraction. So in the second book, I changed it to discovery. And really, I think that's what the experience is, of discovering the values at your core.
Why do you think it is so difficult for people to actually live out core values? I mean, if that's what they claim is at the center of what they believe.
Yeah, you would think, and here's the problem, maybe the greatest dilemma at all, and certainly in the leader version, I tried to look and say, why is this so difficult? And we can look around the world today and we can claim a lot of things that put a lot of pressure on core values. And certainly a lot of those things are actually really good, like measurements and rewards. Those are good things in organizations, but they can also cause a great dilemma if they're not accountable to the values of the organization. And so a lot of it is looking out and saying, what's a challenge out there? The biggest problem, Mark, is the challenge in here. And I found that one of the greatest challenges is what I would call assumption. We think we actually know what they are. And I actually made the same assumption. I assumed that 95% of professionals knew what their core values were. And what I found was that is not true. The percentage is true.
Yes.
It's just right the opposite, that only about 5% actually know. Stephen Hawking had a great quote when he said simply this. He said that the greatest danger of knowledge is, and I'm going to mess this quote up, but it's the whole idea that the greatest problem is that ignorance is not the greatest danger. It's actually the idea that we think we know. And so I totally just messed that quote up, but the idea is that we assume that we actually know something when we actually really don't know what it is, and that's a big dilemma.
Okay, well, just for the record, so you know, there's really, really great odds that Stephen Hawking is not going to see our segment together, so I don't think you have to worry that he's going to come after you.
But he
for
would
that,
know.
quote. But he would know. Okay, well, there's another D that we should talk about here, and it's actually one that I've noticed in multiple organizations. Doesn't matter whether it's the church, it doesn't matter whether it's business, nonprofits, and that's the issue of drift. And you'd like to talk about that as well.
Yeah, so I can remember I was actually sitting at a Starbucks writing the manuscript. I actually thought that authors went to mountain chalets and places like that to write their books, but I was sitting at a Starbucks, and I remember writing this, that I had no idea that it would be the go-to line for almost everyone that reads the book. They want to talk about that one thing. And I should have known from my own life experience, and it was simply this, that we don't go running away from our values. We go drifting away. And one day we wake up in a place that we never meant to be, drifting in a direction that we would have never chosen. And so, you know, we look at sometimes when we see a leader do something really awful, really dumb, and you think, what were they thinking? How could they do that? Well, they didn't get there overnight. They got there over time. It's an inch by inch by inch by inch, which creates quite a dilemma. I mean, if we knew that this is really a bad decision and all of a sudden we're going to jump off a cliff, we wouldn't do that, right?
Yeah.
But it's a subtle thing, and that's what the drift is all about. Now, interesting enough, Mark, I used to think that the dilemma and the drift was the problem. Actually, I think it's actually part of the solution. And what I mean by that is when we drift, that oftentimes those are teachable moments for us. And that's where we really begin to understand integrity, is that if everything was perfect in the world and we were perfect, I don't think we'd actually learn anything. But it's with the pressure, with the situations, that we actually begin to learn. And we all are going to drift at some point. And in those drifts, the thing is to catch the drift, and we will learn things in those different situations.
Do you think that when you're dealing with C-suite type people, that they sometimes are listening to you and going, John, actually, we just need to get back to making good stuff here. You know, I mean, like this is fluff. It's difficult. It's kind of ethereal to some degree. Just comment on that.
Yeah. So I would say this is, and I no longer apologize for it being the soft stuff.
Right.
That's what they would like. A lot would like to say, oh, that's the soft stuff.
Yeah.
And the problem is, it's the hardest thing that they will ever do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times they think that it doesn't have anything to do with the hard bad sense of business.
Right.
And I think we've seen enough situations, and they keep occurring, and they keep occurring. And there's a reason for that, that when we lack integrity, when we lack the wholeness and the connection, that eventually the drift is going to take over. It's not a matter of if it will, it's just a matter of when. And I think there are a lot more people today that are understanding the importance of it. And I think the difference, Mark, when we started along in our career, things were pretty simple. We didn't probably think they were, but they were pretty simple. But today, in an age of speed and change and disruption, I would suggest the faster we go and the more things change, the more deeply that we need to be grounded.
Well, we want to remind people that these books are available on Amazon, right? Or through your own website.
Yep, either way.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in just a second. Return on Integrity, and this is one for the executive level. And then we also have one for those that are in the workplace that maybe aren't at the executive level, and it's called, again, same title, Return on Integrity. And again, we mentioned on Amazon, but also your other books. You can find all of this at your website. And what website is that?
Yeah, so if you just go out to blumbergroi.com, so it's BLUMBERGROI, like Return on Integrity, .com, and a lot of information there, a lot of tools there that could be helpful. And then certainly my blog is there as well, where I post generally at least once a month, and have for a long time. So there's a lot of stuff out there.
And I would imagine if they want to book you as a speaker, there might even be information on how to do that.
I would love to do that.
That'd be amazing. Hey, thanks so much for spending some time with us today, huh?
Mark, it was great to be with you, as always.
I enjoy our visit. Well, that's our program for today. As the sages have told us, grow in wisdom, think humbly of yourself, love one another. May it be so with you. Join me next time for more of Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand.